My name is Sarah Johnson, and I want to share with you a story that changed my life forever. All names, places, and events in this story are true. It all started when I moved to a small town called Bloomsville. I had just graduated from college and was looking for a job in a new city. I always thought that small towns were safer than big cities, but I was wrong. My new home was in a quiet neighborhood with beautiful trees and nice neighbors. My neighbor, Michael Smith, seemed like a kind and friendly man. He often helped me with the housework and even invited me to dinner when I first moved. We quickly became friends. But one night, everything changed. I woke up from a strange sound. It was some kind of scraping coming from below my house. I quietly got out of bed and went to the kitchen to get a knife in case of danger. My heart was beating faster than usual and my hands were shaking. I went to the stairs and started going down. The sound became louder, and I realized that it was coming from the basement. I carefully opened the door and started down the dark stairs. The light from my phone was the only source of illumination, and each step seemed like an eternity. Finally, I reached the basement and saw something that made me scream in terror. A woman's body lay on the basement floor. She was tied and taped. Her eyes were open and looking at me with horror. I didn't know what to do. My first reaction was to run, but I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw Michael standing on the stairs with a knife in his hand. "What are you doing here?" he whispered with horror in his eyes. My head was full of questions and fear. I didn't know who to trust and what to do next. But one thing I knew for sure. This was the beginning of a terrible nightmare from which it was impossible to wake up. Michael was standing on the stairs, and I could feel the fear paralyzing me. I held the knife tighter, trying not to show my fear. His eyes were empty, and I realized that in front of me was a completely different person than the friendly neighbor I knew. "Sarah, you shouldn't have come here," he said coldly as he strode downstairs. I realized that I had to act quickly. "Michael, please explain what's going on here." I tried to bide my time to find a way out of this situation. He just chuckled. "You are all the same. They thought that you could not notice me, ignore me. But now I'm in complete control," he said as he moved closer to me. I took a step back, feeling cold sweat on my back. Suddenly, I saw the woman on the floor start to move. She was alive. I knew I had to save her and myself. "Michael, you shouldn't do this. We can find another solution," I said, trying to distract him. He stopped for a moment, and I saw hesitation in his eyes. I used this moment and rushed forward, trying to grab his hand with the knife. We started to fight, and I could feel my strength leaving me, but the fear was giving me adrenaline. Finally, I hit Michael on the head, and he fell to the floor, unconscious. I quickly ran to the woman and untied her. She was weak, but managed to stand up. "I have to run," I told her. We ran to the basement exit, leaving Michael on the floor. I knew we had to find help before he regained consciousness. We ran outside and started looking for help. I saw a light in the window of one of the neighbors and ran there. I knocked on the door until an elderly woman opened it for us. "Please help us, we are in danger!" I cried. The woman immediately called the police, and a few minutes later we heard sirens. The police arrived and found Michael in the basement. He was arrested, and the woman and I were taken to the hospital. It turned out that a woman named Amanda had been missing for a few days. Michael was a suspect in several disappearances, but always knew how to cover his tracks. This night will forever remain in my memory. I lost my sense of security, but gained the strength and courage to fight for my life. Now I know that monsters can live among us, and we can never be sure who they really are. After that night, my life was never the same. I thought that when Michael was arrested, the horror would end. But it was only the beginning. I was transferred to another city under the Witness Protection Program. My new neighbors were friendly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I started getting strange messages on my phone. They were anonymous but very personal, as if someone knew every detail of my life. One day I received a message from an unknown number. "Do you think it's over? I'm always there." I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried not to panic, but it was difficult. I contacted the police, but they said it could just be a coincidence or someone decided to play a prank. However, I knew that this was not the case. I began to be more careful with my every step. She checked the doors and windows several times a day and even changed her phone number, but the messages kept coming. One evening, when I came home from work, I found the door to my apartment open. My heart pounded in my chest, and I slowly walked inside, knife in hand. All things were in place, but I felt that someone was here. There was a note on the table. "You will not hide from me." I ran to the bedroom and saw that my things were scattered around the room. Someone rummaged in my closet and even in the bedside table. I quickly called the police, but when they arrived, there were no signs of a break-in, and they said there was nothing they could do. I was on the verge of despair. I didn't know who it was, but I felt I had to act. I decided to hire a private detective named Jackson Brown. He was a former police officer and had experience in investigating similar cases. Jackson began his investigation and quickly found out that I was indeed being followed. He found surveillance cameras hidden in my apartment and traced the message signals to an abandoned house on the outskirts of town. We decided to act together. One evening, we went to that house. It was neglected and looked abandoned for many years. We carefully entered inside and began to examine the premises. Suddenly, we heard a noise in the basement. We went downstairs and saw a room covered with screens. Each screen broadcast video footage from different parts of my apartment. My heart stopped for a moment when I saw Michael's face appear on one of the screens. "You won't escape me," he said through the camera. I felt the ground go away from under my feet. How could he be here? He was in prison. Jackson quickly turned off all the cameras and called the police. It turned out that Michael had accomplices who continued to follow me. They were detained, but Michael was still at large. I realized that this is not the end. Michael had accomplices, and he's still around somewhere. I knew that this was only the beginning of a new battle for my life. After that night when we found the surveillance room, I decided that I would no longer be a passive victim. I contacted the police, but unfortunately their options were limited. They could not provide me with constant protection. My detective, Jackson Brown, remained the only hope. We started working together to solve all the mysteries and find Michael. Jackson believed that Michael did not act alone and that his accomplices were well organized. We began by analyzing the evidence found in the basement. Jackson found out that one of Michael's accomplices worked at a local electronics store. It was Adam Reyes, a man who specialized in installing security systems. We decided to follow him and learn more about his connections. One day, when Adam left the store, we followed him. He led us to a small warehouse on the outskirts of town. The place looked abandoned, but it was obvious that it had been used for some dark purposes. We waited for Adam to come inside and followed him into the building. It was dark and damp inside, but we could hear voices. Adam was talking to someone. We cautiously approached and saw a group of people standing around a table filled with cards and papers. "Michael said that Sarah is still alive and she found out about us," said one of them. "We must act quickly before she is upon us." I felt my heart flutter again. Not only was Michael alive, but he was actively planning new actions against me. Jackson took pictures of everything that was happening, and we quietly left the building so as not to arouse suspicion. When we got back to the office, Jackson began analyzing the data. He discovered that the group planned to capture me and take me outside the city. It was a shock, but I couldn't let them carry out their plans. I was ready to fight. We decided to set a trap. Jackson contacted his former police colleagues and informed them of the group's plans. We prepared everything necessary for the operation and waited. The next evening, when the group tried to enter my apartment, they were met by the police. Special Forces fighters quickly neutralized the criminals and arrested them. Adam was among the detainees, and he began to speak. From his words, we learned that Michael was the main organizer and that he had several other hidden places in the city. But most importantly, we learned that he planned to meet one of his accomplices in person the next day. This was our chance. We prepared an ambush and waited for Michael. When he appeared, the police acted quickly and professionally. Michael was detained, and he did not have time to do anything. It was a huge relief, but I knew it wasn't the end. I was ready for new challenges, but now I had support and knew I could fight. Michael ended up behind bars, but his accomplices could still be dangerous. I decided not to hide anymore and to become stronger in order to protect myself and those who are dear to me. After Michael's arrest, life began to gradually return to its usual rhythm. But I was still worried that everything could happen again. I decided that the best way to protect myself was to learn self-defense and to always be prepared. I started attending self-defense courses and even signed up for a shooting course. Jackson continued to help me, but I felt I needed to become more independent. One evening, returning home after training, I noticed that someone was following me. I tried not to panic and remember all the lessons I learned in the courses. I quickened my pace, and the pursuer remained at a distance but did not lag behind. I turned into a dark alley, knowing that there was a shortcut to my house. However, the pursuer continued to follow me. My heart was beating wildly, but I remained calm. Finally, I reached my house, quickly opened the door, and closed it behind me. Through the window, I saw the pursuer standing near my house and looking at the door. I immediately called Jackson and told him about the situation. He advised them to stay inside and immediately called the police. The police arrived quickly, but the pursuer had already disappeared. I began to worry that it could be one of Michael's accomplices. The police gathered information and advised to be careful. I felt myself again in the trap of fear. The next day, Jackson suggested that I install additional security systems in my home. We installed surveillance cameras, alarms, and even got some guard dogs. I felt a little safer, but I was still tense. One morning when I woke up, I saw a message on my phone. "It's not over, Sarah." I felt a chill run down my spine. The message was from an unknown number, and I knew it was them again. Jackson launched a new investigation, trying to track down where the message came from. It turned out to be a temporary number purchased online. But one thing was clear. Someone was still following me and wanted to intimidate me. We decided to act in advance. Jackson advised me to change my life as much as possible to become invisible to my pursuers. I changed my job, my hair, even my clothing style. My new image was far from what I was before. We have also started an investigation into Michael's other accomplices. It turned out that his network was much larger than we thought. Many people helped him, even without knowing the whole truth. Our goal was simple: find everyone involved and stop them once and for all. But it was more difficult than it seemed. Each new trail led to new mysteries, and I felt that we were walking in circles. I knew it would be a long fight, but I was ready for it. My determination only grew, and I understood that I would never be a victim again. My new job was in a small cafe in the city center. The owner, Thomas, was a nice person, and the staff treated me with respect. None of them knew about my past, and I tried to start a new life, leaving all my fears behind. Jackson continued the investigation, and we stayed in touch every day. He found several suspicious persons, but there was not enough evidence to make an arrest. We decided not to lose vigilance and wait for their mistake. One evening, when I was closing the cafe, I noticed that a black car was parked on the nearby street. He looked familiar, but I couldn't remember where I had seen him. The driver was looking straight at me, and I felt the fear creep in again. I quickly got to my car and drove home, trying not to show that I was nervous. Jackson advised me to install a GPS tracker in his car so he could find me if needed. The next few days, I lived in constant tension. A black car appeared near the cafe every night, and I knew it was no coincidence. I informed Jackson, and he decided to spend the night at my house to protect me and catch the stalker red-handed. That night, when the black car reappeared, Jackson prepared for action. We sat in the dark, looking at the monitors of the surveillance cameras. Suddenly, I saw the driver get out of the car and start approaching my house. Jackson advised me to stay inside while he went to meet the intruder. I watched through the cameras as Jackson approached the man. Their conversation was tense, but quiet. Suddenly, Jackson grabbed the man and began to search him. It turned out that the assailant had a gun and a list of names, including mine. The police quickly arrived and arrested the man. During the interrogation, he admitted that he received the order from Michael's accomplices, who wanted to take revenge for the arrest of their leader. This was only the tip of the iceberg, and we understood that the struggle would be long. Jackson and I continued the investigation, working to expose the entire criminal network. We found evidence that pointed to several key individuals, and the police began arresting them one by one. But even with each arrest, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was constantly watching me. I started receiving strange calls and anonymous messages. Once, I even found a note under the door of my apartment. "You will never be safe." This made me focus even more on my own safety. I installed more cameras, extra locks, and even hired a security guard to accompany me at night. My life turned into constant survival, but I didn't give up. I knew this nightmare would continue until everyone involved in Michael's case was caught. But I also knew that I had the strength and support to get through it. My determination only strengthened, and I was ready for new challenges. One day, Jackson called me with news that could change everything. He found a trail that led to one of Michael's closest associates, who might know all about their plans. This was our greatest opportunity to expose the entire network and finally stop this nightmare. I knew it would be dangerous, but I was ready to do anything to protect myself and get my life back. Jackson and I devised a plan to get to this accomplice, whom we identified as James Pearson. He was a senior security officer at a large corporation, and we knew that approaching him would require extensive training. We decided to set up an ambush. Jackson agreed with the police to cooperate, and they agreed to provide us with support. Our plan was simple: create a situation in which James would feel comfortable, and then get him to talk. We collected all the information about his daily habits, work, routes, and acquaintances. One evening, we decided to meet him at his favorite bar, where he often spent time after work. I changed clothes and changed my appearance so as not to be recognized. We were already inside when James walked into the bar. Jackson sat nearby and watched the situation. I approached James and started a conversation. My goal was simple: to win his trust. "Hi, I am new here," I began. "Can you tell me what the best beer is served here?" James looked up and smiled. He started talking about his favorite beers, and we quickly found a common language. We talked about everything except what really interested me. Gradually, he relaxed, and I realized that this was my chance. "You know, I heard something interesting about your work," I said, trying to be casual. "They say you have some very important clients. Is that true?" James paused for a moment before leaning in closer. "Yes, that's true. We have a lot of powerful clients. Sometimes we work with very sensitive information." I nodded. "It must be quite challenging. Are there any clients you don't like working with?" He laughed. "There are some, but you can't talk about them." I decided to take a risk. "What about Michael? Have you heard of him?" James's face changed. His smile disappeared, and he looked at me suspiciously. "Why are you asking about him?" I realized that I had gone too far. "Oh, I just heard some stories. You know how it goes, rumors and all." He sighed. "Michael is a dangerous man. But if you don't want trouble, you better not mention his name." I nodded and changed the subject, but I knew that we were close to the truth. When James went to the bathroom, Jackson quickly walked over to me. "We have to act now," he said. "I think he knows more than he's letting on. We have to find a way to get him to talk." We decided to follow him after he left the bar. Jackson watched James while I waited for a sign. When James left the bar, we followed him at a distance. He walked several streets until he reached his car. Then Jackson stepped forward and stopped him. "Mr. Pearson, we need to talk," Jackson said, showing his ID. "It's about Michael." James looked shocked but had no choice. We made him sit in the car and started a conversation. At first, he refused to speak, but Jackson was persuasive. We learned that Michael had another accomplice helping him avoid the police. This accomplice was a high-ranking person in law enforcement. This meant that Michael had access to information that helped him stay one step ahead. This discovery was a shock. We realized that our struggle was more difficult than we imagined, but we also knew that we now had a new plan. We had to expose the traitor in our ranks and stop Michael once and for all. We spent the next few days investigating. Jackson used his contacts to find this traitor, and when we found him, we knew that our battle was just beginning. The information we received from James made us rethink our strategy. We knew there was a traitor within law enforcement, and that made the situation that much more dangerous. We focused on finding out his identity. Jackson used his contacts in the police and the FBI to track down the traitor. In a few days, we found that suspicion fell on one high-ranking police officer named Robert Harrison. He was known for his impeccable reputation, but his sudden wealth and lavish lifestyle raised suspicions. We began to follow Robert, trying to find evidence of his connection with Michael. Jackson installed listening devices in his office and home. It was risky, but we had to act fast. A few days later, we received the first results. Robert was actively discussing Michael's case with someone on the phone, using code words and trying to hide his activities. That was enough to confirm our suspicions, but not enough to warrant an arrest. We decided to set a trap. Jackson contacted Robert, introducing himself as one of Michael's accomplices, and arranged a meeting where important information was to be transferred. We chose a meeting place in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The next evening, we prepared for the operation. The police were aware and ready to act, but they stayed in the shadows so as not to frighten Robert. Jackson and I arrived at the meeting point early to prepare everything we needed. When Robert showed up, we were ready. He looked nervous, constantly looking around. Jackson walked up to him and began talking, trying to elicit more information. "Are you really loyal to Michael?" Robert asked, eyeing Jackson suspiciously. "Yes," Jackson replied. "Michael wants to know what you have prepared. We need to make sure everything goes according to plan." Robert hesitated, but then said, "Michael knows him on his side. I've provided him with all the information about police investigations. He's always one step ahead thanks to me." It was exactly what we wanted to hear. Jackson sounded the alarm, and the police quickly burst into the warehouse. Robert tried to escape, but he was caught and detained. They found documents and records that confirmed his cooperation with Michael, but it did not end there. During the interrogation, Robert admitted that Michael was preparing for a major operation that was to take place in a few days. He didn't reveal all the details, but we knew it could be something very dangerous. We quickly relayed this information to the police and began preparing for the next step. Jackson assembled a team of top specialists to thwart Michael's plans. We knew time was against us and every minute was worth its weight in gold. The next few days were hectic. We focused all our efforts on the search for Michael and his accomplices. When we finally found their hideout, we were ready for action. The operation began early in the morning. We carefully crept up to the building where Michael and his men were hiding. Jackson gave the signal and the SWAT team burst inside. A fierce firefight began. Michael was among the detainees. He looked tired but not broken. His accomplices were arrested, and we could finally breathe a sigh of relief. But even then, I knew that it was not the end. Michael had too many connections and resources to just give up. However, this time, I was ready. I knew that I would be able to cope with any challenge that fate had in store. My struggle was long and hard, but I was ready for anything to finally find peace and security. Find peace and security. Find peace and security.